Welcome to the deep dive.
Yeah.
Today, we're diving into 2 Corinthians 4:17 to 18. Every pastor knows this one,
Oh, yeah.
but it can be tough to find something new to say about it.
It can, yeah. It's easy to fall into the familiar with a passage like this, but
Yeah.
you've got a whole stack of sermons here.
Yeah.
And honestly, I've got to say, some of these pastors are finding some really fresh angles.
That's what I'm excited to dig into.
Yeah.
We're not going to do the surface level stuff. Like, how do you actually preach this?
Yeah.
And bring something new to your congregation. Go
Right.
beyond the whole, tough times make you stronger thing.
Right. It's easy to get stuck in that. So,
Mhm.
for example, we've got Corinth Baptist Church. They use the Joseph story to illustrate God's purpose in
sure.
suffering. So instead of saying suffering builds character, they focused on how God was working through those hardships to
Okay.
accomplish something bigger.
Okay, I see where you're going with this. But
Yeah.
I think for a lot of people, relating to Joseph is kind of tough. He's this, epic Old Testament figure. I mean, how do you bring that down to earth?
That's a good point. You could focus on the emotional core of his story. So, the betrayal, the loneliness, feeling abandoned by God.
Yeah.
Those are emotions that people facing any hardship can connect with, right?
Yeah, so you're not getting bogged down in the historical details, but
Right.
you're highlighting those raw emotional experiences. And then you can tie that back to
Exactly.
the struggles people are going through today.
Right. And then tie it back to 2 Corinthians 4:17 to 18 by saying, look, his suffering led to incredible good,
Yeah.
not just for him, but for his family and ultimately for God's plan.
It's like, even when we don't understand why we're suffering, we can trust
Right.
God's using it for something bigger,
Yeah.
something eternally significant.
Exactly. Now, how about this? Grace CMA Church. Their pastor used a personal story about a cancer diagnosis to illustrate the verse.
Wow, that's powerful. But also,
Yeah.
it's tricky, right? How do you approach something so sensitive,
Mm-hmm.
in a way that's honest and compassionate and not using your pain as a pulpit prop?
Absolutely. It's a delicate balance for sure. It has to be about vulnerability, authenticity. This church specifically focused on how facing death
Right.
made eternal glory suddenly very real,
Wow.
not just some abstract concept.
So instead of avoiding these tough subjects, you're leaning in
Yeah,
and creating this space for real dialogue.
exactly.
Let's shift gears for a second. Rock of Grace Warren Church, they focused on the Greek word for momentary
Okay.
in this passage to really emphasize how fleeting our trials are.
Yeah. It's amazing how one word can unlock so much, right?
Totally.
It's not just about knowing suffering is temporary, it's about feeling it.
Feeling it, yeah.
Yeah.
And it also gives your congregation tools, right,
Absolutely.
to do their own word studies and dig deeper.
Yeah. You could even encourage them to use some resources like Bible dictionaries or online tools
Yeah.
to explore the original languages.
Okay, this next one. One Generation Church. They actually, this is bold, they use that TikTok phrase, I don't want peace, I want problems always,
Whoa.
to connect it back to 2 Corinthians 4:17 to 18. I'm curious to hear how they pulled that off.
Well, it's a great example of meeting people where they are, right?
Yeah.
Using the language of their culture. They addressed it head on, acknowledged that, yeah, it's kind of a flippant phrase, but
Yeah.
it expresses this deep desire for meaning, for purpose, even if it comes with challenges.
So you're taking this dismissive phrase and using it to talk about what really matters.
Exactly. And then you can transition to the hope in 2 Corinthians 4:17 to 18.
Yeah.
Show how this passage points to a reality that transcends this world.
It's like you're taking something very of the moment and connecting it to an eternal truth.
Right.
It's risky, but it could be really impactful, especially for younger audiences.
Especially for them. The key is to be authentic. You
Yeah.
have to genuinely connect with that cultural reference.
I can see how that could easily backfire, though. If it's not done well,
Yeah.
it could feel gimmicky or just alienate your audience.
Right. It's about finding those intersections where the culture is expressing a truth
Yeah.
that the Bible's been talking about for centuries.
Yeah, that's good.
And, it doesn't have to be just sermons either, right?
Oh, yeah.
All this stuff works in a Bible study setting, too.
Absolutely.
Mm.
You could even argue it's a better fit for a smaller group, right? Where you can really explore
Yeah.
these more, I don't know, maybe unconventional
Mm.
approaches
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
to this passage.
Yeah.
You could even present those sermon illustrations we were just talking about and be like, okay, which one hits you?
Yeah.
Why?
I love that. You're inviting people to share their own experiences, not just telling them what
Yes.
to think.
And it encourages them to think more critically, right? See how this familiar verse can
Yeah.
offer new insights?
Mm.
Maybe they see connections they never thought about before.
Right. And it shows them that there's not just one right way to interpret Scripture, as long as you're true to the gospel, of course.
Speaking of which, I think knowing your audience is huge here, right?
Absolutely.
You've got to tailor your approach to their needs. Are they going through suffering? Are they doubting? Knowing where they're at helps you pick the right illustrations.
Right, yeah. Like if your group's struggling with the problem of evil, that Joseph story could be really powerful
Yeah.
because it provides a framework for understanding how God uses those horrific events.
But if they're more into questions of identity, maybe that TikTok example from one Gen church would work better.
Yeah, it speaks to that deep longing for meaning.
It does.
Yeah.
It's amazing how 2 Corinthians 4:17 to 18 can speak to so many parts of life.
Right. It's about suffering, hope, purpose, eternity.
Okay, let's talk about another tool pastors and Bible study leaders can use. Analogies. We saw pressure cookers,
Oh, yeah.
football games, even fast food,
It seems like anything goes.
right? They can be so effective. Take a complex idea and make it relatable.
Absolutely. Bridge that gap between the abstract and the concrete.
I've got to say, I've heard some real clunkers, too. Like,
Yeah.
so convoluted
Yeah.
that they end up confusing the message more. So how do you find that balance? When does an analogy work, and when does it backfire?
First, it has to be clear and concise. No long explanations. The analogy is a tool, not the main event.
Yeah.
Right.
It's not about being clever.
Yeah.
It's about helping people get the message.
Exactly. And it has to be relevant to your audience. Think about their age, background, interests, what imagery will connect with them.
Like that football analogy might work great for some, but if they don't know the game,
Yeah.
it'll fall flat.
Exactly. And of course, it can't be offensive
Right.
to anyone in your group.
So probably best to avoid things like politics
Yeah. Yeah.
or other hot-button issues.
Yeah.
Stick to universal themes.
Okay, so for our listeners who are prepping sermons or leading studies, how do they actually come up with these analogies?
I think paying attention to the world around you is key,
Yeah.
right? Look for everyday things that can
Yeah.
illustrate the truths of this passage. You'd be surprised what you find.
Yeah, don't be afraid to brainstorm, experiment, and ask for feedback, See what resonates with others.
It's funny, we always treat 2 Corinthians 4:17 to 18 like, it's an inspirational quote,
Yeah.
something for a coffee mug.
Right, right.
But it's so much deeper than that.
Oh, for sure. It's a call to action. It's about shifting your perspective from what we see to what we don't.
It's about living with that unseen reality shaping everything you do.
Yeah. Every decision, every interaction.
So for our listeners who are trying to bring this verse to life, what's the one thing they should take away from all this?
For me, it's authenticity. However you approach this passage, whether it's a personal story, an analogy,
Right.
whatever, it has to be genuine. People can tell if you're faking it,
Oh, yeah.
but when they see you wrestling with this text, that's when it connects.
Because it's not just about information.
Bro.
It's about transformation.
It's about seeing the world differently, embracing hope, living a life that reflects that eternal reality.
Yeah, that's powerful. Well, that's about all the time we have for this deep dive into 2 Corinthians 4:17 to 18. But as always, we want to hear from you.
Yeah, what resonated with you? What are you going to take back to your ministry?
Head over to our website, share your thoughts.
Yeah, we love hearing from you.
And until next time, keep diving deep.